Hey, y'all, welcome back. It's KJ.
Hey, and it's Alice. So we don't know where you're listening from. I listen when I'm getting ready in the mornings and in the car.
And I listen when I'm cooking. So whatever you're doing and wherever you are, tune in because we have a lot to say.
We sure do. Enjoy the next podcast. Thanks for listening. Hey, welcome back to Simple Conversations. Today, I am flying solo. KJ is not with us today for our listeners. I am going to be doing an interview with a longtime dear friend of mine, and we're going to listen to her story of her sweet baby boy. I'm going to say she's halfway through this journey at this point. And so we'll come back and hear the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. And if you're young, you probably don't even know who Paul Harvey is, but look it up. Okay, so for our listeners, today we are going to talk with Carla Marshall. Carla and I go back to about 2005. We went to church together and did youth ministry together. And now we just do life together. So, so there's lots of stories intertwined in there. So we will start today. So welcome, Carla.
Hello.
So I am so glad that you made time. I know your schedule is crazy, like mine. So we were trying to narrow down some time that we could get together. So thank you for making time for us today. I appreciate that.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So I want you to jump right in and introduce yourself to our listeners. Just give me a little bit about you, whatever it is you want people to know about you. I know that's the hardest question to answer because you wear like 15,000 hats. So where would you start?
Well, you've already said my name. I am Carla Marshall. I am married to Ross Marshall, and we have a 2-year-old son named Lincoln Marshall. And I am a small business owner. We own and operate a floor covering store here in North Carolina. And yeah, that consumes a lot of my time, including our 2-year-old that I am here to talk about today.
All right, cool. So Carla's business is a family operated business, which will come into play some in her story. I think that's one of the great blessings of where they are right now, which you'll hear about it. So Lincoln is a miracle on his own. So we will do that story another time because I'm not sure that that we've discussed this before, that you have fully unpacked all of that it took you to get to him, like all the things, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely am still unpacking that journey the more that I grow and learn as we move forward. But it did take us 6 years to get to Lincoln.
Yeah. Of diligently trying.
Yes. Lots and lots of trying.
Yes. Not always the fun kind, just for the listeners to know. Not always.
No. At some point, it shifts from being fun to obligation.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll fast forward into the story. We have Lincoln. And at what point did you think, I don't think something's right?
So December of last year, 2021, he and I were both sick. We took numerous tests and nothing was coming back. So we thought it was just a common cold that would go away.
Right.
And progressively over a 2 to 3 week period, he continued to just not get better. And then we started seeing some spots on his body and some bruising and some things that just weren't common.
Okay.
And so after multiple trips to the pediatrician and calls to the pediatrician and basically getting the same story from them over and over, my husband called on a Friday morning, which was January the 7th, which was 2 days after his second birthday. And he called the pediatrician that morning, and he explained, this is what's going on. It's gotten worse since we talked yesterday, and I need you to lay your eyes on him. I'm not going to take no for an answer. And so they said, okay, bring him in. So he took him in, and they again gave us the same spill that we had been given numerous times. And my husband said, that's not good enough for me. I'm not leaving here until you do something else. I need something else. So they said, okay, we'll send him to the hospital to get some blood work. And about 2:30, 3 o'clock that afternoon, they called and asked if all three of us could come back to the pediatrician's office. And at that point, I knew something wasn't right, like really wasn't right. I said, can I just come, does it have to be all three of us? Can it just be one of us? Because we do own a small business, and we own and operate it. And so it's just us there. And so we knew we were going to have to find somebody to, come there or shut the door. And they said, no, we need all of you to come. Mm-hmm. And so I left like right in the middle as soon as possible. So I left right in the middle of stuff. Like I left stuff sitting on my desk. I didn't pack up anything. I thought, I'm going down here. They're going to give me some news, prescribe something, and then, we'll be right back. As soon as we got there, they brought us in, and they brought us in like a back way. They explained, we're going to bring you in this back way. We need you to make sure you have your mask on. We don't want you to encounter anybody as you're coming in, which is
a little freaky, right?
Yeah, your mind's just going, oh my gosh, like what's happening? But we've lived 2 years at this point in COVID. His entire childhood existence has been in quarantine. And so we went in, they took us into an office, and she said, your labs have come back, and we're pretty sure that your son has leukemia. Wow. And so, of course, huge gut punch.
Right.
And she's like, I'm going to give you a couple seconds. And I was like, thank you. And I had to like just kind of swallow and just sit there.
Right.
And started crying. And I'm like, I know it's appropriate to cry. And she's like, do you have any questions? And so I said, where do we go from here? And she said, well, basically, we've already called Greenville. We have to get you to Vidant, which is now ECU Health. We have to get you there as soon as possible. We have to get your son an antibiotic as soon as possible. And the only way to do that is to go through the ER at Carteret. And she said, we've already called them. They're prepared for you. They know you're coming. And so just, you go there, and then they're going to transport you to Greenville. So there was no going back to work. There was no, what we thought was, I don't know what we thought, but everything was just, it was left.
Right.
So from the doctor's office, we went over to Carteret to get the antibiotic. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to tell that whole story?
Look, you tell as much of the story as you want to, because I know that someone who's listening is going to be like, oh, wow, like they're going to relate and not feel so alone.
So at this point, it had probably been 45 minutes to an hour since they had contacted Carteret to let them know they were coming. They had indicated that when we got there, that Carteret would have a protocol, if you will, for us. And so I went inside, and I tried to, through the tears and the shaking,
how much emotion, exactly,
explain to the lady who I was, and that my son was in the car, and that they said we couldn't bring him in, that we had to go, we needed to know what door we were supposed to go through. And they were like, I don't know who you are. And so she said, let me go get somebody else. So she went to get somebody else. And as I'm explaining the story for the second time, the phone rings and it's somebody calling from the back explaining that we would be coming. And they said, well, I think that she's here in front of us. And so the ER was packed.
Right.
And with COVID, like tons of COVID patients, they were lining the walls. And they were like, we have no way to bring you in here except for to walk you through this, this ER full of sick people. And to back up to his labs, his numbers had come back, his blood numbers had come back so low. So at the time that his numbers came back, he had 3 platelets. And I think his hemoglobin was like 0.5.
So what are normal levels look like?
So normal platelets are 150. That's the low end. And normal hemoglobin is 11.5. And so he had nothing.
Right.
And which meant that if he caught anything,
right,
that it could be fatal for him. And so that was why there was a lot of protection, supposed to be a lot of protection. So they waltzed us in through all of the sick people and they put us in a room. And not to spend so much time on this, but in hindsight, I have learned a lot from this process that I would do differently if it came
right
again for me, or if a friend had to go through this process, because the point of my son going to the ER was to get the antibiotic. And after about 3 hours of being in there, he still didn't have the antibiotic. And the other hospital was an hour and a half away, and they wanted him to get the antibiotic quickly. That was the fastest way to get it, because he couldn't get, they didn't want him to go an hour and a half.
Right.
So after about 3 hours of them not being able to, and the reason that he didn't have it after 3 hours was because there wasn't anybody in the hospital, including the doctors with the Doppler, that could get an IV in my son.
Oh.
And so he was they wrecked him basically. And so on top of all of the emotions of, we think your son has leukemia, and now they've tried umpteen times to get an IV in his arm and they can't.
Oh.
And you're having to call your family and your friends and, let them know what's happening. And you really don't have anything to tell them other than they think Linc has leukemia. And our friends and our family are amazing. And a lot of them came and just sat in the parking lot because they were like, there's nothing we can do, but we just want you to know that we're here and that we're close and we just want to be here. And so they sat in the parking lot for hours in their cars. And I think they even ate dinner. Somebody went and got food and brought them food. And so eventually they ended up injecting the antibiotic into his legs. It was too much to put in one shot, so they had to do one in each leg. And eventually somebody put their foot down and got us out of there, and we took off to the hospital in Greenville.
Now, did y'all drive yourselves or did the ambulance take you?
We were transported. Linc and I, it was actually not an ambulance. It was a local transport company.
Okay.
And who our friend happened to be the dispatcher for the transport. And so when he got the call, he was a little freaked out because he was like, why is this name coming through on the transport? But those guys were amazing. And So Linc and I went in the transport, and my husband Ross went home to pack a bag, and they said pack for at least a week. That was what all they said.
Right.
And so he came here and with my friend, and they packed some bags for the unknown. When we got to Greenville, completely different story.
Right.
In hindsight, and I can't say that this would be the case for every family that would go through this, but I would have driven straight to Greenville and never gone through
Carteret.
the local ER.
Right.
Here.
Just weren't equipped for what you needed.
No, and he didn't get it
right
as quick as they thought anyways. As soon as the doors opened to the hall where he was going to be for the next week, there was a lady who I would later learn was Miss Heather, who is an angel. And she stood up from behind a desk and she said, I think the room number was like 325. And the guy said, yep. And she said, right this way, I'll meet you in the room. And they took us in the room and I sat down on the bed. And I walked around the bed and sat down. And when I turned around, there was 3 doctors and 4 nurses already in the room.
Wow.
Like they had been waiting for us to get there. And this was, by this time, was like 10 o'clock at night. So it wasn't like
not just
in the middle of the day.
Right.
Yeah, we're exhausted, but these people stayed,
right.
Or they were called, some of them were called out of their bed to come back to the hospital to be there when we got there. And they said, we need to get access, which is getting the IV in your son's arm. And Miss Heather, she looked at me and she said, you don't have to be a part of this process. We know what we're doing. We can take him in the treatment room. She said, he is going to scream. You're going to hear him, but we will not poke him if we don't know we can get access. And she said, I suggest that you stay here and take a breath for a few minutes. And really, they've been like that the entire time.
I love that she gave you permission. I love that because I think as mothers, we feel such an instinctual need to be part of every process. And it's not always in our best interest or in our kids' best interest.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. Yeah.
I didn't want him to be alone or feel like I had sent him off somewhere.
Right.
But I also knew there really wasn't anything that I could do. I'd just be standing there. And she knew that little bit of a recharge was probably better for me and for him in that moment. So they immediately started, once they got access, they took labs and they immediately started from that point forward running tests. They were kind of in and out for most of that first night. It was pretty busy. And very quickly within, I can't exactly remember, but within 1 or 2 days, they had actually ruled out that it was leukemia.
Okay.
Which was a huge weight lifted off of us. And so from that point forward, we were just trying to figure out why were his numbers the way they were. Because by the time that we had gotten to Greenville that night and they took his labs again, he was down to 1 platelet. So he had lost 2 of the 3 that he had. And I think his hemoglobin was like 0.2. So it had even dropped.
Wow.
Even more. And a few days later, with tests, the doctor called us in for a family meeting. We went down the hall and into a conference room, and literally there was 10 support people from the hospital. The chaplain was in there, the caseworker was in there, there was doctors, there was nurses, just all these people surrounding you, they're wanting to help you. And she explained that they had come to the conclusion that Linc had aplastic anemia, which is bone marrow failure.
Okay.
And that is the reason that all of his blood levels were so low, because his bone marrow wasn't working and it wasn't making any of it on its own. And they allowed our parents to be videoed in for that. They allowed, and they were very happy to have them a part of the conversation. And they've been very welcoming and happy that our parents are so supportive of, us and the process, and that how involved that they are. And we're grateful that they allow them to be a part, because this is definitely not something that, I don't know how people that don't have good support systems go through this.
Right. How common is the bone marrow failure? Do you know?
I don't know the percentage, but it's very rare. Aplastic anemia is a rare disease, is how they expressed it to us. I should have probably looked that up before we started talking, but
no,
it is a very rare condition. And the good thing is there is a cure for it, and the cure is a bone marrow transplant. So they explained that to us that day, that they were going to, now that they knew what it was, that the next steps were to see if they could figure out where it came from. So meaning, was it bacterial? Was it viral? Something viral that brought it on? Was it genetic? And so they started running tests to figure out where it came from. And we never, to this point, have really been able to figure out where it comes from. And that's a big issue with aplastic anemia, is that a lot of times they don't ever find out where it came from. And so that's also a big challenge in like trying to find ways to prevent it, or
treat it, diagnose it,
or things like that, because they don't know why that it happens. So initially there were 2 genetic markers that came back as potential reasons, but his 2 particular genetic markers that came back were not commonly seen together, and not commonly specifically attached to aplastic anemia. And so they didn't think that was good enough. There wasn't enough there for them to say that specifically was the cause of it. There were some other things some other diseases that were potentially attached to those. So they did their due diligence and they checked on those things as well, and didn't find anything.
Good.
So they pushed to move forward with a transplant, which we will do with UNC Chapel Hill, if it comes to that. After meeting with UNC Chapel Hill, they recommended, and our doctor also consulted with Duke, and they agreed that Linc try a immunosuppressive therapy that sometimes works to restart the bone marrow. So it's a 12-week process. It's kind of how they run it on a 12-week schedule. And so it starts with a week of chemotherapy, which is done in the hospital, which really just kind of immunosuppress. It's to suppress his immune system even more. What little bit that he has, it suppresses it even more. And then he takes a medication twice a day for that particular therapy. It started, I think, for 30 days. We took 2 medications, and then after 30 days, we just take the other medication. And they run it on a 12-week scale because normally if it's going to work, it's going to work within a 12-week period. And so that also would put us in from the time that we started it, it was going to take about 3 months anyways to get things rolling with the transplant. And so they were like, there's not really much of a risk in doing this. Right. And we're not losing any time. It's not causing us to push the transplant back. So we'd like to try this in the meantime. So we have been doing that now actually for 14 weeks. We finished the 12 and we met with UNC again, and they do have a donor for Linc for transplant.
That's amazing.
And I'll interject here because prior to this particular, this happening to Linc, I had never thought about being a bone marrow donor. Mm. And, I almost felt like guilty when they first were telling us about it, because I'm like, I haven't done this, and yet I'm going to ask somebody to do this for, we're going to, not that you being on the registry says that you're ever going to get called.
Right.
But I need to rely on somebody else for this. And I've never considered it that this was a thing. I didn't even realize for whatever reason that it was a thing. My husband and I have both given blood before.
Right.
And I have been a recipient of blood after his birth. I had to have some transfusions. And so I know, how important that is. And I had never considered bone marrow being a donor. And so I asked them immediately. I was like, if we can't help our son, can we be, I was so naive to the whole process. I'm like, can we be put in a database to say that we'll help somebody else's child or another person? And so they explained how it all works, and that it's a database, and it's a simple cheek swab that you can get. They send it right to your house. You swab your cheek. And it does have an age range. I believe it's between 18 and 44 is the most optimal time to be a bone marrow donor. And so we're getting closer to the top end of right. that. So we don't have that much longer, but it definitely is. We definitely want to at least give this last bit of time if we can do this for someone else. And so people ask us all the time, what can you do to help? And being a bone marrow donor may not directly help, Linc. Obviously, I just mentioned they have someone specifically picked out for him if it comes to the transplant. But it will help somebody else. And so that is a way to help. And also, he currently gets blood products 2 times a week. And especially during COVID, there was a large national blood shortage.
Right.
And so I can't imagine if somebody was in a hospital or somewhere that shortage affected them in this way, if they walked into our room and said, your son needs platelets, but we don't have any.
Right.
And so that definitely is a way that everybody can be involved
right.
in helping in situations like this to give blood or be on the bone marrow registry if you're within that age group.
So for our listeners, I will include a link to your Red Cross and as well as the bone marrow transplant database thing for you to look that up as well. I'll include that in the show notes. So tell me now, what does life look like for you now on a weekly, daily basis? Keeping him safe, still trying to run a business. Like what does life look like?
So we go to Greenville, which is about an hour and a half away, twice a week. We spend basically the day there twice a week at the hospital. And those people, I cannot say enough about everybody that works there. We absolutely love all of them. They are angels, and they treat Linc like he is king. But we see them 2 days a week. They do blood work both of those days to determine what his levels are, to determine what he may need. So most of the time he gets platelets at least once a week, sometimes twice, but usually at least once. And then the hemoglobin lasts a little bit longer, so he gets that every few weeks. Backing up to that initial stay in the hospital, before he, the initial test, they had to do a bone marrow biopsy. That was how they found that it wasn't leukemia, and then landed on the aplastic anemia. And he blew 4 IVs within the first few days. And that was excruciating to Miss Heather that I mentioned earlier. I remember it was the night before he was going to go into surgery, actually, to have a Broviac port installed into his chest. And it was in the middle of the night, and he blew that 4th IV, and she just stood there and cried beside his bed. And so he had this Broviac port installed in his chest, and that is now how he receives all of the blood products or any kind of IV medication that he gets. Everything goes through that port. And
when you say blew the IV, what does that mean?
So it blew the vein.
Okay.
So that line was no longer able to be used. And so then they would have to find another spot to put that in.
Oh, I think we hear him. For our listeners, I think that's little Linc.
He just got up from a nap. Can you say hello?
Hi, Linc.
Hi,
How are you?
that's Mommy.
I know, I see Mommy. You going to say hello again?
Hello.
Hello. Okay. So, you were talking about the bone marrow.
So we spend 2 days a week in the hospital. The other time we basically spend like COVID. We spend the time at home the majority of the time, because we have to keep him isolated to one, for him to not get anything, because he doesn't have an immune system. So we don't want him to get anything, because it can be so much worse on him.
Right.
Over the course of the last 6 months of going through this process, we've spent several weeks in the hospital where he was running very high fevers that we were never able to explain, but just anything can set him off. My husband Ross goes into our store with my father, and I work predominantly from home. And my amazing mom or mother-in-law will come on the days that we're here during the week, and they alternate and come and stay and help to keep up with him while I try to get some work done.
Right.
And on those days that we go to the hospital, there's some days the work bag goes with us, and especially if we're there for a week, we take it, and we're very grateful, as you mentioned earlier, about the part that plays in this story for us. Yeah. We haven't had to get rid of our jobs. Mm-hmm. My dad has stepped up in a big way to take on the store when both of us can't be there. And everybody to this point has really been so kind to accommodate the fact that we're running shorthanded.
I remember a conversation that you and I had when the weather was just starting to get nice, and we were discussing how you had to even be so careful to let him play outside as much as he loved to be outside, because things that you and I would not be susceptible to, things that you didn't even think to know about, could cause harm.
Oh yes. Like we actually bought him one of those turtle sand pits. Mm-hmm. And put clean sand in it because he liked to get out in the sand. And so we tried to be mindful and think of these ways that we can still allow him to be outside.
Right.
The sun is a big thing. We have to keep him very, we're pasty white anyways, but we have to keep him slathered in sunscreen. And moving forward after transplant, that's something that he will have to deal with for the rest of his life because of that transplant process. Okay. The sun will be, a big thing that he'll have to try not to be out in so much.
Okay.
But even down to when they first started the process, and they were explaining that when he's like super low, that he is in a neutropenic state. And so they were explaining all the ways that, like with food and different things, that he can't, that we have to be mindful of now. And so like, I've always washed my fruit, but it's like, oh, we have to really make sure that we wash the fruit. And there's certain fruits that he can't have because you can't get them clean. And, anything that's peeled is better than something that's not peeled. And, we don't give him soda, but things like, soda that comes through a line in
like a fountain drink.
Yeah. Or, tea that is from a restaurant, because it sits in those and they don't clean the spouts a lot.
Well, for anybody that's listening to people who work fast food or in a restaurant, you know what we're talking about, because you've taken those machines apart and you've seen that gross stuff in there. Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah. It's nothing that I would think of today about.
No, it's all stuff that we just do and we don't even think about it. And so things like ice cream from Dairy Queen or McDonald's, because it's in a machine, it's not like handmade or whatever. Right. Things like sandwich shops where everything's sitting out, buffet stuff where stuff is sitting out. I have a friend that is just obsessed with sanitation grades. Because she's worked in the restaurant industry for a really long time.
And we can just say Michelle. We all know it's Michelle, right? Michelle. Hi, Michelle. I hope you're listening.
She got me obsessed with sanitation grades. And so, but now it's like, I not only look at the sanitation grade, I look at like what the, like the reasons for the sanitation grade.
Right.
And which is crazy because it's things that, I never thought about it before, yes, I didn't want to eat at a restaurant that had like a C rating. Who wants to do that? But, Linc can't eat anywhere that's 95 or below. Like it has to be 95 or above. And it's just all these things that your day-to-day life now is consumed with thinking about. He can't have something if it's left out for a certain period of time, like stuff that we normally would just be like, we'll slide it over there. If I want it in 30 minutes, I'll come back and eat it. You can't have that anymore. So that's what our life looks like now. That's kind of what it is consumed with, but we do have a great support system. And so really, as like tough and focused as it is, we're very grateful for everybody that has stepped in to that can, because we really, if our parents come around Linc, they have to wear a mask. And we just don't really allow him to be around anybody else. Like he's only around the people that we have to allow him to be around for our family to survive, basically.
So tell me, how are you and Ross doing with all of this, and how are y'all together? Because it's a lot of stress, it's a lot of tension, a lot of emotion. And so I know if, we don't regulate emotion and discuss it, then instead of being a team in something that's so high driven, then we can often turn that towards each other, against each other. So how are y'all doing?
I don't want to say great, because that just sounds too good to be true. And it probably is. But we had been married for 15 years when we had Linc, almost 16 years. And it was really easy for me to be upset about the amount of time that it took. When we got married, we kind of said that we wanted to spend about 10 years together, getting to know each other. Because let's be honest, you don't know each other when you marry. No. When you get married.
No.
You might think you know some things, but you really don't know each other at all. And the breaking away from your families to create your own family is probably one of the hardest things that we do in life. And we are so unprepared for it. And so, while all of our friends were getting married and having babies left and right, and we're just like, by the time you guys, have babies, our babies are going to be graduating from high school, which can confirm did happen. Right. We were just like, we want to travel, we want to do all these things and take, at least these 10 years. And then it took, 16, almost 16. But we really believe now that we are in the best position to be parents. Not that we're that we're perfect, but we are very thankful for that time, and very thankful for even the time that it took to have Linc, because we are the best version of ourselves to date. And so we do flow in and out of each other very well. Case in point, I'm sitting here having this conversation. He's got up from his nap, and my husband went and got him, and they're outside playing. And, that hasn't always been the example that was modeled, right, to us. But we do flow in and out of that very well. And we flow in and out of, most of the time, we're not both stressed to the max at the same time. We do have moments where we both are. And, it's just, we just have to, have our space. But right. We, most of the time, do really well in being, the support of the one that is overwhelmed at the time. And then vice versa when, he's overwhelmed and I'm, his support in that. So we're very grateful for, even though we didn't want it to be 16 years before we had Linc, because Ross just turned 40. And so, in our culture here, that's like ancient to be having babies. And so, but we really, while we would change the heartache of the years that followed us or that preceded us actually having him, what it allowed us to grow into, to be as prepared as possible for what we didn't know was coming.
Yeah.
We wouldn't change.
I understand that. Yeah. Wow, what a story. So from this point forward, you're still doing the treatments and you're looking at moving forward with the bone marrow transplant when?
So they're looking to schedule it in August.
Okay.
So they initially were hoping for July and that didn't work out. So they're working now to get a date in August. And they would like for us to continue on this current treatment until the transplant date or until the treatment works. It's very rare that the treatment works past a certain time, but it's not that it can't happen.
Right.
So we are still hoping that will, that could happen. And we continue on that path until it works or transplant day comes. From the transplant day forward, if we end up having to go transplant, that starts the clock to full recovery.
Okay.
If the treatment were to start working, we're not exactly sure how long he would have to continue on the treatment before he would be in remission, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But the transplant, the days are pretty much numbered from the time of the transplant. It's about 1.5 to 2 years before we can integrate fully back into the world. And
in time for kindergarten.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And he will just have to be monitored. Once he gets to a certain point, he'll just get monitored every year for the rest of his life to make sure that everything's working properly.
Well, good. All right. Well, we will stay in tune with what's going on and post pictures to our page now that our listeners have had a chance to hear your story and to hear about Linc and to see his cute little face. So thank you for sharing your story with us. I know it's emotional to go back and relive some of those moments. So thank you for your courage.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.
Okay, listeners, thank you so much. If you have questions for Carla or want to leave comments, feel free to do that in the comments section. As always, thank you for listening and have the best day available to you. Hey, you guys, we just want to say thank you today. We want to thank our listeners and those of you that have subscribed to the Simple Conversations podcast. Friends, thanks.